On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Harshit Shah. He is the CTO at Kyruus Health. We're going to be talking about high performance cultures within the engineering team. You know, it's actually interesting. Right before we hit record, Harshit was mentioning how with technology evolving, there are different challenges, but some of these core tenets never change. And what we're going to be talking about is how do you identify the attributes? How do you help really cultivate that high performing culture? And also in this market, we are seeing people do more things, be empowered to have to actually push the limits. So this more with less concept is really important. And also we're going to talk about geo-strategy, right? I mean, a lot of people, a lot of talent, the pandemic showed us that we could do things differently in different places. So we're going to cover as much as we can with Harshit. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Amit, for having me. You have built very fantastic set of community and very interesting set of topics from the previous speaker that I get to learn. So fortunate to be part of this community and contribute in a small which way I can.
Awesome, man. No, thank you for your time. And before we start, I guess Kyruus Health, could you tell everyone just what the company does just at a high level so they know kind of a little bit of the context?
I think at Kyruus Health, if I were to describe in the most simplistic way, is the vision and mission we have, which is very close to my heart. When we think about the access to the care in entire US, finding the provider in cost-effective way which matches to your need is one of the most important problems in the healthcare space. So at Kyruus Health, we are passionate about solving this particular problem. When Graham founded the company a decade back, was with that simplistic focus on hey, how can we leverage the data and insights to make sure that an individual looking for the care is matched to the right provider, and how can we digitize that entire experience. So that's what we have been doing, and we have been pretty successful, both serving our health system and the provider community. We have close to 500,000 providers on our platform, as well as working with our members and the health plan, where we serve close to 100 million covered life in the US. And they are able to use our web and mobile applications to not only discover and search for a provider based on their conditions, but they are able to also look at all the related information to make an informed decision, whether it is the rating for a provider, whether it is their availability to schedule an appointment, whether it is practice specialty that they are part of, so on and so forth. So we have grown organically and inorganically, acquiring certain assets along the way, and team is very passionate about what we do.
I guess this topic's really, I think, it kind of fits your backgrounds. Yeah, obviously we'll link to your background, but you've been an engineering leader at different companies. You've seen different ways companies are building different businesses, different all these different things. You've seen a lot of different best practices. It's interesting because I think you mentioned technology is evolving and the engineering culture does evolve, but there are some basic tenets, and I think you use the word tenets that really are the underpinning. Just from your experience, when you're looking at a high performing culture, I think it'd be great just to define to you what is high performing in that scenario of culture.
So this is the question I live and breathe, and we can talk about the next 3 days on that. But if I were to distill it down, what makes a cultural attribute, especially for the technology team, these are in 3 buckets. First and foremost, engineers are the builders. Right? So how we make the things, and given high performing teams have a certain attributes on how they go about the craftsmanship of building a software, building the product, releasing the new capabilities on the roadmap, and keeping the bar high, both from the security compliance point of view, as well as paying the tech debt and making sure that the foundation is solid, where it is not crash and burn, how the systems is being built. The second bucket on high performing culture is also how we operate the things, right? Every company, the startup, when it is thinking about the first product market fit, but at some point of time, it is going to cross that chasm where it is going to be say, hey, you know what? Your existing customers and keeping them happy is an important aspect of roles and responsibility for the technology team. So how we operate the team, how we think about the scalability, how we think about uptime for your service, user experience for your service, going to be very, very important as well. And last but not least, the human aspect of it, right? How we are functioning as a team. What is our decision making practice look like? How we are hiring? What is the bar we are keeping? How we are doing performance management? How we are doing conflict resolution? Right. So all of those are becoming important part of defining a high performing team. And when the observation of a high performing team comes to few fruition, which is when you feel that an engineering team or a technology team is singing to the same tune of the larger orchestra. It is close to the customer, it is close to the business, it is functioning well with the other stakeholder, not only like product and design, but also with the sales and marketing, also with legal and compliance team, etc., becomes very, very important on a high performing team. And behind the scene at the individual level, where an engineer or engineering leader, when they look back at their experience in like that given time quantum, they will feel that they have professionally grown, whether being challenged to build new skill set, whether having opportunity to have a higher impact, and they feel that just the acceleration of their toolkit has expanded, and how they are well supported, right? So it's a combination of what you see as a collective team and what you see at the individual level on the high performing team.
You got me thinking about something. When you said engineers are the builders, I mean, I agree with you, and that's a fantastic articulation of that as one of those pillars. When you look at technology and its evolution, when you're looking to identify people that are going to be additive to raising the level, right? Being in that high performing culture, you need people to constantly come in and bring those new ideas, bring a different perspective. To me, I kind of view software engineering as the skill. I think if you're a software engineer, the programming language is immaterial, right? Yeah, you might not just be as well versed as the next person, but the fundamentals, they're always there. When you look at high performing people, and the reason I'm asking this is because it's interesting, because sometimes you see people look for the high performing culture, but then there's but they need that, but I need this, this, and this, and this. And when you do that, then you're like, well, am I really looking for the most skilled person, or am I looking for a person that actually solves a particular pain point? When you're hiring, when you're looking to build out a team, how do you balance that? How do you balance, I want the strongest potential engineer, but then I do know I have these issues on the team. I need someone to fill this void. How do you balance that?
Fantastic questions, right? And I would use a few analogy at the expense of showing my passion for football. I'm based out of Seattle, so I'm Seahawks fan. But when we think about an NFL team, it's not about that you need to have all players who are quarterback. So when you think about from the team composition or the individual's hiring point of view, you need to have a very clear plan on working back from your business need. What is your overall org design look like? And within that org design, you should be able to kind of fill in the right roles which are playing that pole position to make that overall team composition. To give you an example, in my previous role at other healthcare startup company, when I started, we started pretty much at the ground level, right? We had engineers who can be counted on a single hand in terms of the count, but my one of the first focus in the first month on the job was to build that blueprint on 18 months from now, what is the org that we gonna be? and then define those blank boxes, and then all my hiring effort to bring in the leader, to bring in the engineer, to define the guild of the staff engineers, all of those were in the service of working back from that North Star. Now, the second part of your question, Amir, that you are asking, which is, hey, what are the attributes I believe or I value as a leader on an individual as a high performing? You called it out the skills, right? I mean, there are a lot of scientific way to assess somebody on the skill, right? You can have a programming exercise, you can have system design exercise. I'm a mentor for a company called Interview Kickstart, and they have done fantastic job of having the curriculum based preparation when you are preparing for a technical or a functional interview like that. In addition to that, what I truly believe into is how an individual is showing up, which makes or breaks how they're gonna be the gravitational pull to build a high performing team around that, right? So the first and foremost, functional skill being aside, to your point, that problem solving skill, somebody coming in with a growth mindset is gonna be very, very important. What that means is they are not asking the questions on, or their default answer to everything could be that say, hey, why not? If they run into the roadblock, they are looking around the corners and then say, hey, what is the way to solve the problem if we do in option B or C or D way, right? So having that growth mindset where somebody is problem solver is very, very, very important for that. The second aspect of it is more and more in the post-pandemic world, teams are operating in a hybrid or a distributed fashion. What that means is somebody who is not only good communicator, but good collaborator becomes very important, right? You might have seen 2x2 on the high aptitude and high attitude kind of quadrant. Nobody wants to work with somebody who is fantastic at their craft, but hey, you know what? Every conversation with them results into pain. So the aptitude matters and the collaboration matters when you are building a high performing team. While it's not the only aspect, it is one of the important ingredients, right? And the last but not least, going back to the growth mindset, I think it is very, very important where somebody is focused on constant learning, right? It applies to me as a leader. It applies to everybody that I would like to be as part of the team as well. Because, hey, mistakes are gonna happen, things are gonna work or does not work, but as long as there is a mindset of taking the lessons from something didn't work and applying for the future growth becomes an essential skill that are far valuable in any high performing team.
I think I love the explanation, so I do appreciate it. And I think you mentioned obviously collaboration, distributed teams, that high performing culture. How much does that come back to the CTO? Because obviously the alignment, making sure that the engineering vision, purpose, goals, all of those things are connected. Is it just a little bit harder with a distributed team? Are we learning how to do that? Or if you're properly managing your team, it shouldn't matter if you're distributed or in an office or hybrid?
So jury is out on that, right?
Jury's out on that's fair. That is actually fair.
The reason I say that, at least from my learning, what I'm seeing that there is this entire spectrum, both the companies, their size, scale, and the domain they are operating, as well as the opportunity they might have got on putting some checks and balances at the maturity level, right? So if I were to start my startup today, I would prefer to have everybody in the same garage and having an arm distance away to make a much faster and quicker decision rather than waiting on somebody on not having that, right? Because if you're not in person, we lose the fidelity of the communication, right? It's a proven fact. Similarly, some of the larger companies what they are struggling with is how to continue to have that passion and creative juices, which might be missing if you're not having access to whiteboard in person, right? So that's why in the recent news we have seen talk about Google or any of this organization and execs trying to have everybody back in the office. But I believe there is a middle path. And that middle path is how do we combine this hybrid structure where we are having people opportunity to have in-person FaceTime time to time, but at the same time having the mechanics in place which allows the distributed work, right? In that way, you are able to attract a wider talent. You are able to not have that dichotomy of work-life balance where people are able to orient and adjust their life around their work as well as family, right, and get the best out of it. So to your question is like how much the remote work or the in-person affects, I think organization have to be continuously thinking about it and adjusting it. Pandemic has shown us that with the right tooling and the right support system, things are achievable, right? And I do believe that it is here to stay. I personally have worked in the remote team over the last few years, and opportunities that I have got to make an impact would not have been possible if the world was not open to the remote team.
I think it's an interesting conversation. Obviously, also large companies, small, everyone's trying to figure it out, the balance. And going back to, obviously, we talked at the beginning about technology evolution and how do you maintain that high performing culture. And I think high performing is going to be different for different companies, but generally speaking, I think we can all just assume that we all adapt. And I think that's one of the things that I think we just haven't had enough time. When I talk to leaders, I'm like, we had 60, 70, 80, or 100 years of a workplace where everyone was in the office. We've only had 4 or 5 outside. We don't have the tools. We don't have the processes to be as clear. So I think it'll be interesting to see how things continue to evolve. I was going to ask you, when it comes to you and your role, and you're responsible as the CTO for many different parts of technology. Obviously, you have you have leaders running individual areas, but each of those teams are very different, right? The DevOps team and the software engineering team, let's say full stack, or however your team's broken up, and you can even give us an overview of how it's broken up. These are distinctly different teams, distinctly different skill sets, distinctly different pressures. How do you, as a CTO, work with your leaders, and then they obviously work with their teams to be able to have consistency across these different units? Because it's almost as though if I was the CEO and I had to deal with the marketing and the finance and the accounting, it's not too dissimilar for what the CTO has to do, because they all might as well be different business units. But how, I guess the question for you is, how do you work with your leaders so that there's clarity on what you want from the culture itself?
I would start with, first and foremost, that I've been fortunate to have a fantastic set of leaders over here at Kyruus Health, right? The VP of Engineering Technologies that we have and our engineering leaders have a lot of industry experience. They have seen what the good look like at other places. And more importantly, they are very much ingrained and aligned to the culture that we have and the core values that we have. So I've been fortunate to learn, partner with them and learn from them. To your questions around, there is a variability depending on your functional role, depending on your team, and how do you kind of not only drive the consistency, but what are things that requires to be consistent, right? So this is where I fall back into, first and foremost, focusing on communication. And one of the skill set that I picked up having spent my time at Amazon is extremely writing oriented culture. Right. So as a leader in my role as a CTO, it is very, very important to articulate what that North Star or the forward-looking plans or the goals look like in a written format that allows the reader to absorb that and create that understanding, which might not be possible just in a verbal or a one-on-one kind of conversation. It also allows us to scale, where the same artifacts can be taken up in a multiple different ways in a broader audience to kind of absorb what the messaging look like. The second part of it is as you might have heard about, like A player attracts the A player kind of things. Having that right leadership in place is very, very important, because at the end of the day, my direct reports or their direct reports are the one who are closer to the problem, closer to the team, and they play very, very critical role of driving the cultural attributes across the board. Having said that, we also focus on few things as a mechanics to have a consistency across the board. A specific example is we have started this practice of doing our weekly quality of service reviews. What that means is each feature team or engineering team, whether it is infrastructure DevOps or whether it is our web health application team, they come and they talk about the metrics that matters to them, right? So while there is a variation based on their focus area, but the cultural attribute that say, hey, we are grounded in the metrics, we are grounded in the data, we are grounded in the quality, and we focus on or we obsess over that operational excellence is a common attribute that are expected of everybody. Similarly, we look into, there are fantastic set of tools off the shelf which are available, which integrates with your Jira or GitHub or whatever source repository your team might be using to give you an insight on what does that cycle look like in terms of the engineering productivity, in terms of the cycle time, in terms of the how sprint over sprint your team is operating. So we look at those metrics to do benchmarking, not necessarily comparing team A to B, but how team A is improving over the period of time, right? So to answer your question, Amir, while you need to have that flexibility at the ground level on how teams are operating, whether they are choosing Kanban versus Scrum or one methodology over other. You also need some framework which remains as a consistent gauge or a meter for team to align with. Because the last thing that you want is having so much variability that prevents internal mobility, right? A person want to have a opportunity in a career moving from team A to B, they should not feel that say, hey, they jump the ship and it is completely brand new, right? So having the consistency, having some framework, having the transferable tool set on how we do CI/CD or how we do feature flagging or how we do observability or monitoring across the board are very, very important aspect to drive some of those consistency.
I like that. I think as I'm listening and I'm taking in the whole conversation about high performing cultures, we've talked about being hybrid, being remote. We talk about potentially, leveraging resources in the best place they should be. I guess, just kind of curiosity, because I think this hasn't come up yet, and we just might be too early to know. But I am asking the question on thoughts. When you start looking at, again, going back to the technology evolution, we are seeing Gen AI come in. We are seeing, products out there that are co-pilots for helping generate code. It's still early, and this notion of how Gen AI is going to slipstream into our work is still unknown. I don't think anyone quite has a clear perspective, but we're seeing a lot of it being used within software engineering. When you think about your team and you're thinking about where you guys drive value, right? That level of, we need to have excellence within the engineering team. As these products start maturing, as the team starts leveraging them more and more, will you have to start redefining what the team does? I mean, if all of a sudden, if the team has more capacity that isn't being taken up writing daily code, how do you start envisioning that? Again, this is like a futuristic question, but just kind of curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, and I can bet my 20 that every boardroom in any given company are having these discussions, right? I think my personal opinion, and I am very bullish on the opportunity across the board, and not just the software engineering, across the board in our lives and any role function that we might be doing, on how the advent of the Gen AI based tool set is going to up the game. right? Now, 30 years back, I spent a decade at Microsoft, but I'm sure in early 90s, when Microsoft launched Office portfolio from Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, people had similar kind of both the excitement and the apprehension that say, hey, you know what, is a spreadsheet gonna take my job away if I'm an accountant, or what does it mean for my own job or my role a part of it? And I believe that fast forward few years, all of us, if I'm writing my resume, I will be calling it out. I'm proficient with XYZ model. I'm proficient with XYZ tool, whether it is Copilot, whether it is ChatGPT, or you name it, kind of thing, right? And so building those essential skills are going to be very important part and parcel of everybody's kind of growth going forward. On the other side, I do see a lot of opportunity while we are in the early trajectory on the adoption usage. There are some tall claims which are not being validated, at least internally, when we are adopting this tool set. But I do believe there is a lot of potential. So first and foremost, I think the way to think about it is there are certain software engineering activities which are very prime candidate, right? We know that writing the test automations and having the code creation happening over there is a tremendous value to increase the code coverage across the portfolio of applications. It's a fantastic set of things. We have also seen success and with having the documentation. So when we think about some of our legacy part of the stack, or where we are thinking about onboarding new team member, instead of an individual going and spending countless amount of time because code keeps changing, having the Gen AI based tool set to do the documentation on how our code is structured, which allows somebody or a new team member to ramp up quickly. Fantastic set of value that we are having, right? And the other part that we are saying, which is say, hey, you know what, certain of the greenfield projects where there is no past kind of context or background is needed are greatly benefiting to just get started. This is very similar to 15 years back when AWS launched their first set of service, and it revolutionized how products are getting built, because now you don't need to worry about infrastructure. You put your credit card, you have your APIs, and you are able to spin up a EC2 instance and have your storage. Similarly, you don't need to spend a lot of time in a boilerplate code anymore. You are able to get up and running very quickly, especially for the greenfield project, right? So I am a big believer on embracing the changes that are going on and evaluating how it applies to the individual job function and building the skills around that. And at Kyruus, not only the software engineering, we are doing that outside of engineering as well. Whether it is our marketing team, whether it is our HR team, right? They are embracing and looking into different ways where existing workflow can be more efficient, optimized, or enriched using or leveraging the Gen AI tools.
Interesting. I obviously, to your point, there's a lot left to the story. I think we'll go through more iterations of tools. We'll go through more iterations of learnings, all these things. It is interesting because I think your example of Excel rings true. And I think that I actually subscribe more to that than we're going to see, mass layoffs of software engineers because, machines are writing all the code. And also, the one thing I always bring up is software engineers are good problem solvers. There are other parts of the process they can be pushed to versus just focusing on, the act of coding. And I think that'll be an interesting development in terms of how that skill set grows and being more injected into the business earlier. I think cybersecurity people always want to shift left. I think software engineering will shift left. It'll go closer to the business than waiting for some of the decisions to be made. But as you said, we got a long way to go. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you for sharing. We haven't scratched the surface. We could keep diving in, I think, and we still would have plenty to go. But I know you got to get back to your day job. But I do appreciate it. If somebody wants to reach out to you to talk to you or ask you a question, a follow up based on something you mentioned on the podcast, what is a good way of reaching out to you?
I would love to connect. I have a I love the inbound connections coming through LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn profile will be available in the notes as well. Happy to set up the time, have a follow-up conversation, and that will be the best way to reach out as well.
Okay, awesome. Harshit, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Amir. I love our conversation and looking forward to learning more from the next set of speakers you have on the podcast.
Awesome. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think talking about technology evolution, high performing engineering cultures, I think the two are very related. And I think one is actually helping drive the other. And I think everything Harshit mentioned was really interesting. We talked about those attributes of high performing engineering that will help us build that culture. We talked about managers and how do they actually work within that construct, reporting to him. And we've covered a lot of stuff. We even touched on some Gen AI stuff. Obviously, that's a little bit further out the view. So those are just some vision stuff. But please share this with somebody else who might be interested in hearing about this type of content. I'd appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.